Kia ora koutou katoa, everyone. Morena, and welcome to this next NZILA Streetscape webinar. Today we're delighted to have Margo Long joining us from Vancouver in Canada. But before we begin, I'd just like to thank our sponsor Streetscape, who continue to sponsor these webinars. This is the 5th in the series, and we have more coming up soon, so check out Streetscape's website. Please don't forget to mention NZILA webinars when you're chatting about your next street furniture project. We'd like to support those who support us. So first up, here's a brief video from Streetscape.
Streetscape is New Zealand's leading manufacturer of quality street furniture, lighting poles, shelters, and sculptures that breathe life into our open space environments. Collaborating with landscape architects and designers to share our manufacturing expertise and experience, we create solutions to meet your design brief, your budget, and your project delivery deadline. At Streetscape, we have a great range of off-the-shelf furniture. Together, we can modify and customize our existing ranges to suit, or we can provide the design support to manufacture fully bespoke furniture for your project. With all furniture proudly manufactured in New Zealand from locally and ethically sourced materials, and with over 100 years of combined experience, you can be sure of the craftsmanship. Quality products made to withstand our unique environmental conditions while meeting all local health and safety standards. Local doesn't just mean local knowledge and local jobs. It also means reduced lead times and a local team who manage every step of the way with you to see the project from your concept through to final delivery. Aotearoa, New Zealand, these are our places, our communities, our environments, and we want you to enjoy them the way you imagine them. That's why we go that extra mile every time. Streetscape, turning your imagination into reality. Streetscape, in conjunction with the NZILA, are proud to sponsor the Streetscape Speaker Series.
Well, thanks again to Streetscape. Just a reminder, we'll have a presentation for about 40 minutes, and then we'll follow that up with some Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and we'll come back to those at the end. So I'd just like to introduce our speaker, Margo Long. Margo is a founding partner and principal at PWL Partnership in Vancouver, Canada. She holds over 35 years of experience in private practice, specialising in innovative community and public realm projects. Known for her creative and progressive thinking, Margo is a big picture thinker. She embeds the values of truth and reconciliation, climate change adaptation, emotional connection to nature, and community health and wellness into her designs and project approach. Margo truly believes in landscape design's ability to reinforce healthy and happy communities amongst all species. So welcome, Margo, and over to you.
Thank you, Henry. You might be wondering about this graphic for presenting about landscape architecture, but it's from a current project we're working on and that I'll be speaking to, and it represents the intention of this presentation and the telling of the story of our practice and purpose that informs it. I am presenting from the traditional territory of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. Our office, just to put where I am in context, we're located in Vancouver. We have one office. There's about 45 staff of landscape architects, urban designers, and planners. And we are about 14 hours away by plane, and that must be Air Canada, I don't know. We recognize we are new to this land. In our design process, we acknowledge and learn from the Indigenous peoples. Our responsibility as advocates is not only a business best practice way of life, but a commitment to making a positive social and environmental impact. To this, creating meaningful and places means discovering the stories of the place and telling those stories through a landscape, inspiring communities and enhancing human connection to place. We prioritize inclusion and active participation by team members in design development. By putting in the extra effort required to draw out unique perspectives, we make space, advocating and amplifying the quieter voices. We recognize that landscape architecture is a profession, as a profession has played an indisputable part in forming the social fabric of our cities. We recognize that we must do better. Systematic racism and brutality against people of color has hit a tipping point, and it is clear and vital that we push further, faster. I will say that everything that I'm going to show you today is not just me, it's part of our team in collaboration, all the projects and the presentation and everything together. Our office started in 1976 as a one-person office with a very kind of traditional private practice on many diverse projects. Our firm over the years has evolved today, and this is our vision: making places, engaging people, and inspired by nature. Over the past 30 years, Vancouver's population and development has exploded, which is why so many of our projects aim on connecting people to nature, especially in dense urban environments. We are collaborators who embrace new perspectives. We create equitable and inclusive environments to achieve better or greater social cohesion, health, and well-being. We combine the ecological, historical, and cultural aspects of each site to create innovative, imaginative environments that capture the essence of place. We work on a wide variety of work, not only to stay resilient to changing market and political and social forces, but because we believe in the meaningful impact of green space in all our aspects of lives, and that natural spaces should be available to all, which is why we select meaningful projects that align with our values. A large portion of our work includes civic, educational campuses and institutional work. This happens to be a project, is a green infrastructure project at BCIT, which is the British Columbia Society Institute of Technology, which contributes to the campus's living lab and demonstrates functional stormwater management while providing a great amenity. We create interactive learning environments which encourage spaces that foster community, create conversations and offer educational opportunities for people of all ages. This is a project up at SFU. It's the observatory and science courtyard. We design engaging environments that promote discovery of outdoor recreation. These vibrant public places evolve and grow with the needs of each community while providing flexible spaces for active and passive play and community programming. We are known for creating, along with our collaborators, diverse and vibrant public realms. We work on brownfield waterfronts that are transformed to new mixed-use communities with large waterfront parks. And a significant part of our work over the past 30 years has been a focus on multifamily and mixed-use residential, including seniors, social, rental, and market housing. We aim to strengthen the social fabric of communities through thoughtful planning and design, ultimately bringing people together. Our approach creates opportunities for people of all ages to interact, play, and connect with nature. And these are just a few examples. We work with clients to unlock new potential and redefine communities we find. We find unique ways to tell stories that reveal the history of the place, helping define a distinctive identity. Since 1995, we've had the great opportunity of working with First Nations on projects throughout the province, and these are projects of varying scale. These have really enriched our practice and enabled us to better understand how we can be better allies to our Indigenous friends, neighbors, and colleagues. These meaningful projects helped us understand the impacts of our country's painful history and begin to understand the importance of truth and reconciliation. We design sustainable places that give back more than they take. Through innovative approaches, we try to restore the integrity of urban environments and create communities that bring people closer to their natural surroundings and to each other. We know access to nature has proven impacts on individuals' health and well-being and on the city's ability to be resilient to the shocks associated with changing climate. Hinge Park provides a play space for kids while also serving as a natural environmental wetland in a newly built community. The park is focused on an urban wetland, but it cleanses all the stormwater from the streets, circulating through a series of terraces before it goes into the ocean. Garden City Lands is a 136 acre, 55 hectare site of undeveloped land in the heart of Richmond. Protected under the Agriculture Land Reserve, this unique low-lying wetland and now a restored bog has historically sat unused for the past 60 years. Now it is being reimagined as a park amenity with 4 distinct functions: urban agriculture and food security, natural environment, community wellness, and active living, and placemaking, creating a multifunctional landscape. While the removal of the CP lands in the 1980s created an opportunity for a new development, this is a 80 acre site. This is actually one of the first planning projects we ever worked on in the early in the late 1980s, and it's just across the inlet from Stanley Park, which is a 1,000 acre site in the middle of Vancouver, if any of you have ever been here. One of the ideas was to turn it into a one of the newest neighborhoods on Vancouver's waterfront. This project was done in collaboration with many team members. And over the years, it's now been 30 years later, and over the years, we've had the opportunity to work on a number of the park and public realm spaces, including the new Civic Plaza at the Vancouver Convention Center. This is a 6 acre and 2.4 hectare living roof, which is the largest at the time in Canada, and has incorporated LEED initiatives throughout the entire open space. One of the interesting things about this project was that is a strong, incredibly strong place for ecology and to see how our practice can make a difference. The roof modifications moderates the heat in the building, improves air quality, cleanses and reduces rainwater runoff, and creates valuable habitat. The new habitat became a self-maintaining, regenerating living roof with flushes of grasses and wildflowers appearing about 12 stories above the harbor. This project is the world's first double LEED Platinum Convention Center. And this was done, over 10 years ago. And it is sited between land and water, where the ecological edge and interface is so important for aquatic life. The project also has a black water system that helps for the irrigation of the roof. The living roof is a native grassland found in our region. Today, entomologists from UBC are using the roof to study insects and learn how living roofs contribute to the biodiversity in our urban environments. Through our visits up on the roof, we have found ground nesting silver white crowned sparrows, not usually found in an urban environment because of humans and predators in park settings. So this project really creates tremendous biodiversity in a highly urban environment. From this vantage point, you can look across the inlet and see 3 North Shore municipalities. This is the site built out today, and you can see the density of our city that we live in. And this is after 30 years. There's the last project is just being built on this site, and it's being built by the community park and neighborhood park, and it is a school with social housing above it. So this community and master planning brings us to Southeast Falls Creek, and this is where I want to really start my talk today. Southeast Falls Creek is one of Vancouver's first sustainable neighborhoods. It's a vibrant pilot project to test infrastructure. This project has become one of, after the first phase of the Olympic Village being built out, as one of the first LEED Platinum neighborhoods in North America. The entire project totals about 80 acres or 32.5 hectares. And it is built on one of the last industrial waterfront sites remaining in the city, in the inner city. We worked with a huge multidisciplinary team to develop the master plan in collaboration with the City of Vancouver and stakeholders. And the focus of this talk is how climate change is changing the way we practice at first. And I will discuss our design approach, some research we have done, and then finish by showing you 3 projects that we have on the boards right now, and how we collaborate to address climate change. The main threats of climate change on our collective landscapes are intense urban heat, island effect, increasing flooding, decreasing air quality, rising sea level, changing biodiversity, and finally water shortages and drought. This list is not exhaustive, but is really the critical things that as landscape architects we deal with today. So for the past 20 years, we've learned and believe that landscape design solutions should be addressed through nature-based systems and solutions. These components of landscape architecture all work together and cannot be separated. These are tools in our landscape designer toolbox. But we can't look at these individually to solve problems. As designers, we need to view the landscape through systems thinking lenses. It is important to truly understand how these components are interconnected and work together. Within a system, especially natural systems, one component influences another. Therefore, it is important to think holistic and cyclical rather than individually or linear. Urban heat island has proven to be an effective metric for PWL to quantify and confirm effects on the landscape-based solutions, and also to get buy-in from our clients, municipalities, and the public. What gets measured gets managed. How we do measure and prove the effects of our natural-based solutions is one of the things we've been looking at. Based on climate change, heat island models have been generated for many years now, and scientists are experts at determining how much our urban environments are warming. There's tons of data and it's all easily available. In the past few years, climate change has become so important to us because of rising temperatures and just the effects that it has on the landscape. So what our firm tried to do about 4 years ago was see if any of our projects had made a difference after a number of the major developments had been built out. So we took, this is a plan of Vancouver, and we worked with many multidisciplinary teams on all of these projects. But the idea was the data, this data comes from the NASA USGS Landsat analysis ready data imagery, which is available to anyone in the public. And this map is from August to, we picked a date in August, which was probably the hottest time, but just out of interest, we did that. And the map is from 2005. It shows the surface temperature of Vancouver. And we chose that date because that was the date a couple years after the 2010 Winter Olympics were announced. So a lot of projects started and were happening and were in the planning sense aspect. And then this is a map 13 years later in 2018 in August that shows the increase in the urban heat island effect on our lands, forest areas, natural areas, and even the ocean. It's kind of difficult to see the specific changes for particular areas, but you can see that generally speaking, there is an increase in the surface temperature of about 4%. Since the variation of the maps is difficult to see, we decided we would apply a formula to each of the pixels in the formula or in the imagery to identify which areas were hotter, which stayed the same, and which became cooler. This map identifies the areas of Vancouver that are actually cooler and which are hotter and which stayed the same. And basically, it might be a little hard to see, but the greener areas are the ones that actually are cooler, cooler over 13 years and haven't increased in temperature. So it just so happens that two of our projects were actually in these zones, one being hotter and one actually being cooler. So we thought we would, we thought that was kind of interesting. And so we did a bit more research and we kind of investigated it. That's not to say one project is better than the other, but one project is actually performing better from a surface temperature standpoint, which when we start to think about climate change is really important. So this first one is the Olympic Village, and only 26 acres of it, of the 80-acre site, was developed for the Winter Olympics. And the site was, even though it was a site for where the Olympics stayed, it really was a site developed for future residents and not necessarily for the athletes. You can see 13 years after that the temperature seems to be a little bit different. Actually, it looks like it's not as red or not as hot. And yet, when you analyze it from the different temperature and we apply our formula, you can see that the site is actually cooler in the developed area, while the remaining site has stayed kind of undeveloped. And you can see the additional sites around it which have actually increased in surface temperature. So this just shows it kind of over time. You can see in 2005, 2018, and then the difference over time. This is what the site actually looked like in 2005, and this is what the site looked like in 2018. As I said, a number of people worked on this project. There were 3 landscape architectural firms. We did the parks, the waterfront, and the open space. PFS did the Village Plaza, and DKL did the buildings and all the roofs. And what was interesting about this project was it had, all of the buildings were concrete slab buildings with an extensive green roofs. It had a green roof policy and targets that were mandated by the City of Vancouver, a 50% green roof target, but actually the developer went to 80% green roof. And you can see, you know, that probably helped in the heat island effect. And there's significant tree cover, permeable sites, stormwater features, all that have contributed to the site. This is another one of our sites that we worked on in a master planning standpoint. You can see the green in the site is actually where there was a forest that had to be taken down over the 13 years for development to happen. So it actually became hotter. And you can see the difference in some of the areas which have been developed, which are on the left side of the development site, have actually stayed the same, but the areas got hotter are the ones where the forest has come down and there's other development that has occurred there. And this is what has happened over time. So the building form of this neighborhood started out a little bit different. Through the last 5 years, it actually has, the building form has changed, and the density has become higher. So I think if we were to do it again in another 10 years, or at least another 5 years, we would see a difference in the surface temperature. So what we took from what we learned, and we researched through this, and we've been using this with municipalities and developers to help change the narrative. This is extremely critical in our urban environment, where density is dramatically increasing and climate change is becoming more critical every year. So this is just examples in the last 4 years where we have been taking this, and we're starting our projects. This is how we start many of our larger scale development projects. And why I'm kind of talking about this today, and why it is relevant today, is last summer the Pacific Northwest had an anomaly called a heat dome, and where we've had temperatures of over 40 degrees, which we've never had before. And the effect, this is the same effect I think that is happening in Europe today. A year later, a coroner's report came out, because during that time, over 600 people died of the heat, of heat exposure. And there was also a loss of an entire town, and there were forest fires at the same time. So what this report basically came out with, cited a number of issues. The first one being based on community and neighborhood and directly relates to urban tree canopy and greenness of urban areas, which is exactly what landscape architects focus on. Alex Boston was one of the executive directors of the Renewable Cities program at SFU, served on the panel, and he came out with 6 or 7 initiatives or strategies to help affect the heat, to affect the excessive heat. Of these, 5 are directly related to landscape architecture, which is amazing when you think about it. So I thought I would go through these 3 projects. That was sort of the talking a bit about the research that we've done. And I thought I'd go through 3 projects that we have on the board, so you can see how we apply nature-based solutions to our projects. This is an 11-acre site surrounded by single-family housing, industrial, school, and community centers. This is Cornelia Hahn Oberlander was the landscape architect in the 1960s for this project. So it has been identified as a colonial cultural landscape by the American Society of Landscape Architects Landscape Cultural Foundation. The preservation of the trees, and particularly the pine trees planted, was important to Cornelia, that we talked to her about before she passed away a couple years ago. After years of pushing the edges, we had a client and design team that tried something different in the norm of Vancouver. The project is a social housing project owned by BC Housing, a provincial housing authority that provides affordable and social housing to house families and people. This site is on the edge of Vancouver and Burnaby. For many of our projects, we try to look beyond the context of the site, and we put them in regional and watershed context. The First Nations say that the site is connected to more than the immediate surrounding area, so we try to look far beyond the area to help inform our design solutions. This site is on the Still Creek watershed, which really is mostly extends into another municipality, but still is important for the city of Vancouver. The guiding principles were established to address tenants first, health and wellness, the environment, place, and resilience. One of the things that we're dealing with in Vancouver is increased density and affordability and lack of housing. So this plan was to dramatically increase the density all for social housing and market rental and social housing as well. So it has had a strong people focus. One of the big approaches was to connect the trees and soils together to reinforce and connect the watershed. Most projects in Vancouver build from property line to property line, and a site like this would typically have built from property line to property line with no native soil left underneath. Suzanne Simard, author of Finding the Mother Tree, which I highly recommend, is a UBC professor. She, along with other researchers, discovered that trees in the forest are a web of interdependence linked by a system of underground channels where they can perceive and connect and relate with an ancient intricacy and wisdom that perceive or that no longer can be denied. Her experiments led to the discovery that trees communicate through this communication and relationships in what is called a forest society. At first, the evidence was a bit highly controversial, but now the science is known and to be rigorous, peer-reviewed, and widely published. So this led us to our Talking Trees and Connected Watershed design approach. The idea was that by connecting the trees and the native soil, it reinforces the watershed, it increases the urban canopy, and it provides a resilience that a typical project would not necessarily have. From the people standpoint, the public realm and the meeting needs and expectations of the residents will be critical as well. And following along that, there are private realm and public realm need to work together. There will be places for dogs, for urban agriculture, for places to gather, outdoor kitchens, community places, private places, and all the roofs will be used. And we'll also look at sports and recreation and accessibility on a fairly steep site. This project right now is in the rezoning phase and has a long way to go before anything is built, but we know we have to reach far and big at the very beginning because things always get cut back. But these big ideas, we really embrace and want to work through the whole process on. The next project is going to be shown strictly through a master plan report that was generated by two First Nations, the Tsleil-Waututh and the Musqueam Nation. And they were done by an Indigenous graphic artist. And that's why I'm kind of showing you them in this format. A lot of work was, again, another project on the edge of Burnaby and Vancouver. And this is called Willingdon Lands. The nations were represented at absolutely every single meeting, and they were through the entire process and collaborated in an incredibly meaningful way. This was a project where by working with the nations, they could help design with the design team, helped embody their history into the site, not the colonial history of the site, which is the first time we've ever done a project like this. This was partially done through storytelling, and the plan is partially a collection of stories that the nations felt that they could tell and wanted to share to help guide the master planning process. Not all stories can be told because they need to be kept sometimes within the nations. This site has a creek on it, so it was important. Again, the creek is part of the Still Creek watershed, and salmon are so critical to our environment, and all of these creeks ultimately end up in watersheds that end up in oceans that connect to a variety of different salmon runs. So The salmon are an indicator species of how our environment is doing. In order to define how the vision was created, each of the 4 guiding principles was expanded to create a set of design directions. The first was respect the past and embrace the future. And because of the cultural influence of these principles and design directions are so very different than a typical developer, the master plan project came from the First Nations perspective and not entirely a colonial perspective. The second was connect with land and water. Third, nurture a sense of place. And finally, the fourth, advance reconciliation and accommodation. This will be accomplished by planning for future generations. The First Nations in this region plan for 7 generations ahead. This is one of the, on this project, there will be daylighting of a creek. And a lot of our work is, we do hand drawings and perspectives. So the last project I want to show you, returning back to False Creek, I'm going to wrap up this presentation by telling you about a project. This isn't a project I've been directly working on, the other ones I have been, but this is really important to our office. And Derek Lee and Sophie McNeil in our office have been working on this project with the City of Vancouver. This project is about advancing the purpose in our practice and making meaningful change through a value-driven design process. The Sea to City Design Challenge, the idea was that the city hired 2 design teams to work on the project. Our team was PWL, MVRD, and Deltaris from the Netherlands, and Corey Douglas, a local Squamish cultural advisor. And for that, we were given 2 sites to work on, and the challenge is to deal with sea level rise in 2100. And of course, a huge part of our process has been understanding the past history of the site. This map shows the original shoreline of Vancouver in the 1880s, and not only in the physical and biological sense, but also in the cultural sense. We know that the Indigenous peoples were living, working, and stewarding these lands and waters since time immemorial, and that we have a moral and professional obligation to advance the objectives of truth and reconciliation. And we imagine the design as we imagine the design of our city. So you can see some of the park site we're dealing with is not, was originally mudflats. What was interesting about this project was at the beginning, the city, the typical way to approach this is words that really didn't work for our design team. With the parameters of the project scope and phase, we focused on the efforts of recognizing basically that colonialism within the working approach was wasn't what we wanted to do, and it was the wrong way to speak and think about the project. For example, in conversations with Corey, our Squamish cultural advisor, and Charlene, the project's Tsleil-Waututh knowledge keeper, we came to understand that the typical language of adaptation for sea level rise, which really is resist, accommodate, and retreat, were informed in a way that really didn't work for the project. And by rewording these approaches to better reflect Coast Salish values, we were forced to completely rethink how the designs could respond by them. And these relationships were better enriched by the process and really informed. So we went from resist, accommodate, and retreat to protect each other, host, and move forward. Here again, representing in an illustrated adaptive pathway of flowing currents, that we are all in this together, and our process is not linear, but fluid, cumulative, relational, and always moving forward. Typically, an adaptation pathway is a tool designed to plan for adaptation, decision-making by identifying and decisions and actions that need to be taken now and in the future. The typical approach supports strategic decision-making that is both structured and flexible. In the context of the Sea to City project, this pathway has become reimagined as flowing currents, using water as a metaphor to describe the fluid, cumulative relationship and forward-moving process of adaptation. So even though we're looking at two distinct, very different sites along False Creek that we were given to address sea level change, it's not only solving it at a site scale, it really needs to be solved at a more systems-wide approach, and to see how our cities can work on the relationship with nature in a more human, human way, and less of a engineered way, we will say. So of course, this is a design challenge, and so we needed to focus our efforts and meet our deliverables and work together on all of this. So we had to change our clients' minds a little bit, but they were pretty open to it. This project is very much still in process, but I wanted to share some of the beginning kind of big picture ideas that we were thinking about that we're also got excited about. The first one is between the bridges, the existing site, and recognizing that when we look ahead, we need to be able to imagine the future we want if we're going to start building it. If we were first tasked with envisioning the site in 2100, then the sea level rise would be over a meter higher. Instead of a hard seawall, we'd imagined a mix of floating walkways, adaptive buildings, tidal terraces that celebrate the rich boundary between water and land. But how do we get there from here and to here? So long-term objectives often require near-term decisions and actions. In the face of uncertainty, pilot projects can be immediately initiated to explore ideas, investigate what works, and a nature to renewed sense of collective action in False Creek. A really cool thing about this project is how the process and deliverables were itself has become really adaptive. And the idea is that we're not only looking to 2100, but we're looking at what we can do in the next 10 to 20 years to reach the importance of the 2100 vision. So we worked with MVRD, the Dutch architects and urban designers, to propose 4 different pilot projects that could provide this immediate activation and could be implemented relatively in a short time frame. The idea was that the experimentation was to help with the restoration of the waterfront in a way to engage stakeholders, get feedback, and see about the first kind of feasible ideas in the first steps. So 2 of them, one fun idea was working on the project with the project ecologist, was the idea of a habitat island, a floating kind of habitat island. While the longer vision of the seawall includes pulling it back and softening the edges, in the short term, this could be a possible idea that could engage the public and create true habitat at the water's edge. Mini forests, or the Miyawaki method of afforestation, which I'm sure you've heard about from Japan, allows for a rapid creation of urban pockets of native forests, fast to establish and virtually maintenance-free until these forests offer quick start opportunities to create a haven for urban biodiversity, carbon sequestering, cooler temperatures, stormwater management, and access. So the idea was that this is another project that could happen between the bridges in a relatively immediate way and with less than 10% of the tree canopy coverage in this vegetation, this could really help the canopy cover. And so this was one of the other piloted projects to get to here. So here's the vision of what the site could be if we were to dive in and initiate these projects in the next 5 years. And here's a summary of what could be done at the second project we had, which is Cooper's Park, which is very different. It's only a short 10-minute walk from the other one. Today, Cooper's Park is a vulnerable park with almost non-existent backshore or intertidal movement, because it was developed in the 80s as well. In the future, we could demonstrate what our natural and space, what could happen from naturalizing the spaces and restoring by transforming static parkland into a dynamic community space for humans and non-humans alike. This approach illustrates a cultural shift and imagines a future where the city has reconnected the nature and recognizes a relationship and reciprocity and respect of the water. This is it today, and this is it reimagined in 2100. But the first steps again with the pilot projects are relatively small, and they're small and actually achievable. And just quickly, before I finish off, I wanted to share this example of a quick start project that really could be an impactful project that could immediately start with Coast Salish Nursery and Demonstration Garden. The Coast Salish Native Plant Nursery provides opportunity to reintroduce native plant species to False Creek with purpose to reintroduce native species, connect the land community with land stewardship, try test species for adaptation. And a key component of this pilot project will be a demonstration garden that educates the public on traditional ethnobotanical practices, and emphasis will be placed on the cooperation with the First Nations and reconnecting the community with the native ecology of False Creek. This image shows the beginning of this transition. And again, this is something that could be done within a relatively short time frame. So I will end here, and I just want to say that we are stewards and one paddlers of many. Being aware of this fluid and collective process that we're in has made us better designers and people. And I would like to conclude here and repeat that what I have heard so many times with our Indigenous collaborators, we must all paddle together to get to where we need to go and to truly make a difference. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and hopefully something has sparked your interest. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Margo. That was fantastic, and I think we might be 14 hours away on a plane, but I think New Zealanders and Canadians have a bit of an affinity in that we have some big noisy neighbours, and we're a little more grounded and down to earth. And I think it's really great to hear about Vancouver. We probably hear quite a bit about your place, perhaps more in the context of urban design and intensification and some of the great work that's happened around that. But I think it's really great to see some landscape led projects. And you know, I think Auckland and Vancouver have quite a bit in common from my perspective in Tamaki here. So it's, you know, it's really great to see some landscape led projects and to see the influence that you've had on some of those integrated communities and new neighborhoods. And always been a bit of a fan of a of a heat island graphic, and it's really nice to see the sort of evidence of that coming through and supporting what we all do as landscape architects. So great presentation, and thank you so much. I'm just going to remind everyone that just to drop some questions into the chat if you've got questions for Margot. I think there's one here that I'll start off with, and I think just based on your experience at how you've managed to convince developers and architects to sort of embrace some of the landscape-led approach, and perhaps in particular how you've managed to deliver on some of those green roof ideas, which is something that we probably talk about a lot here, but haven't quite managed to really deliver on. So if you've got any thoughts and tips for that?
Well, I have to tell you, it's baby steps all the way. But I will say that climate change has actually brought, I think, the profession of landscape architecture more, it's more highlighted, because a lot of the solutions are landscape based. And some of them are simple as trees and soil, I mean, and water, which is a lot of what we kind of touch and embrace and have researched and experience on. It's just been in the last, I would say, few years that I did that heat island presentation 4 years ago, and didn't get very much traction. I keep doing it now and I get lots of traction, and everyone is excited. And I was just telling someone this morning that architects were giving a presentation to the Vancouver Coastal Health, and the architects were talking about the trees and the connected soils. And it just was, it kind of warmed my heart and said, if we can get everyone talking the same way, that will be a part of it. So and we just continue to be advocates, and you know, a lot of clients and staff and other landscape architects and my office will say that I really don't shut up about it, and I am always pushing the edges. I get pushed off projects and they go to maybe one of the other partners that is more developer driven than I am, but it takes all of us to make it work, that's for sure.
That's great. I've got another question here, which is I think is a good one. Just in terms of that heat island sort of analysis and that approach that you've taken, have you come up with any sort of thoughts or principles around ideal or minimal kind of threshold covers for canopy and landscape through that analysis? Well, we're working now on urban tree canopy cover. We're trying to work with a 40% cover. That's best practice, best management practice, but that's what we're promoting to developers and cities. Vancouver, used to be much higher at about 27. Now it's, down to, I'm not even, in some areas it's, less than 4%. And in some areas it's around, 18. And now they're going from, the city of Vancouver, I think is going from an overall, and this does not include Stanley Park. If you include Stanley Park, it's much higher, but they're going now from 18 to 22%, which is really not very high, I would say. So from a metrics standpoint, we are trying to work with that kind of tree canopy coverage of, of 80%. I will say though that one of the things that we're also dealing with in the city is a lot of our landscape is on rooftops. And as rooftops, when the membranes have to be replaced 30 years from now, we're probably going to be losing our tree canopy unless they take all, they haul all the trees off and then put them all back on. So there's something in the future. We're not really sure about what's going to happen. I guess there's always a bit of a tension, isn't there, between, you know, how you usually do things and how you do things differently. I mean, have you got any thoughts on, you know, in terms of the work around sea level rise on the waterfront there that you've kind of learnt out of that?
Well, what we have learned is that people like to be close to the water, and the closer they are, I think the better it is. So in Vancouver, there's a number of projects where where the development and retail and restaurants are kind of hanging over the water, and other ones where it's pulled back. So where the projects that are close to the water are, we have a certain, you know, our sea level, our seawall is at one single elevation, and the city's asking that it rise any new seawall is actually risen 2 meters, which is hard to connect it. So from you know, what we've learned is that we need to soften the edges and be more resilient and pull the developments back from it so that we can work with the changes that have to happen at a more environmental standpoint. That's quite challenging, I would say, in Metro Vancouver where we live, because land values are so high. And so that's why parkades go from property line to property line, and every inch of every part of the city is used. And that's why I think from a landscape architecture standpoint, we don't have any leftover land, or we don't shrub it up, because we don't want to shrub it up because we need that space to do to work really hard in a really multifunctional landscape. So it's you know, the things that we deal with in our area is really because of density, lack of housing, or more people coming to live here, high land values, and climate change was all, you know, things which you know, normally I never dealt with when I was going to school taking landscape architecture.
We're probably kind of approach the end of time, but I might just try and squeeze one more in, and a question here relating to talking trees, which I know is always a fun topic for us to bring up at dinner parties and things as landscape architects. What have you learned, I guess, around you know, that concept, and how you make sure that happens in terms of, you know, regenerating soils and retaining soils and below ground environments that actually enable that, you know, that ecological approach and that canopy cover to occur?
Well, we're just starting our first project, our first like maybe 4 projects right now where we're using this talking tree approach, and we're asking the developers to to not think about, like, put parkades only under buildings and not everywhere else. And that is, like, if we can achieve that as landscape architects, that is absolutely amazing, because the site will become far more, I think, resilient. Yesterday we were out on a site and taking temperatures between buildings and then out in the open, you know, without tree canopy, and then under the tree canopy, and then under a cooling station that they had with misting happening, which was actually hotter than it was under the trees. So I think from the standpoint of extreme heat, I think we're seeing that the saving particularly large mature trees and the soil underneath them, and then connecting those trees significantly together so that they can all talk together and help one another and feed each other and benefit from each other, really will be an amazing resilient landscape, which will, I think, ultimately take less maintenance. So when you talk about operations and maintenance, anything we can convince the developer to do and the city to do that is going to reduce maintenance and address, I think, resilience and climate change. You know, I'm not sure about New Zealand, but those are the kind of words here that people are listening to.
Fantastic. Well, I think we might leave it there. We have a saying here in New Zealand, a whakatoki, which is a waka eki noa, which translates to we are all in the waka together. So I think that relates to your closing comments, so look, we really appreciate the time you've taken to share your thoughts and your projects with us, and I'm sure it's been educational and informative to everyone who's tuned in. I understand it's a long weekend over there for you, so enjoy that. And
Thanks, Henry.
just want to say thank you again to our sponsor Streetscape for enabling us to put on this this series, and thanks for those who've joined in, and thanks very much, everyone. Ka kite.
Thanks. Bye.